Kia ora, good evening. Progress towards the replacement of the 87-year-old Kawarau Falls Bridge has taken a step forward after all opposition to a new bridge was dropped. Remarkables Park Limited and the Frankton Community Association have withdrawn their opposition to a proposed new double-lane bridge just prior to a scheduled 5-day hearing at the Environment Court yesterday. The existing structure allows for traffic flow in one direction only, creating a traffic bottleneck at the main southern route into one of the country's most popular tourist spots. The plans for a new bridge will now be presented to the Otago Regional Council's Transport Committee for approval and then to the NZTA for funding prioritisation consideration. If funding is approved, the project could be underway in 2016. Construction is expected to take 2 years and cost $18 million. Some of the South's top athletes carried the Olympic flame through Invercargill this morning before carrying the torch north to Dunedin for the Special Olympics 2013 Asia Pacific Games. Dozens of athletes were escorted by police through Central City after receiving congratulations and encouragement from Mayor Tim Shadbolt. The torch has been making its way south to raise awareness of the National Summer Games kicking off in Dunedin tomorrow. The Games, held every 4 years, are the largest regular sports event for people with intellectual disabilities in New Zealand. Athletes compete in 10 Olympic-style sports, some including aquatics, athletics, basketball, golf, indoor bowls and powerlifting. Combined Trade Union President Helen Kelly is in the city tonight addressing educators on key issues confronting their sector. Hunter Andrews took the opportunity to ask the CTU President whether unions were still the force to be reckoned with that they once were.
Yes, my views are that 22% of workers belong to unions, and 360,000 people, we're the biggest democratic organisation in New Zealand, and we represent a lot of other workers who don't have the opportunity to join, but who are covered by collective agreements basically in their workplaces, but also groups like forestry workers, where it's a great risk to join a union, but we're representing them and doing a lot of work on health and safety for them.
Would you support a return to compulsory union days?
No, what we're looking for, this is not about unions, this is about workers. What we're looking for is new law that supports workers to recognise their international rights to freedom of association and collective bargaining. Now, if you are a forestry worker, joining a union is a risk. Chances are your employer won't like it. You have to join in a traditional way, but also collective bargaining is impossible. Joining together with 300 other little contractors up there in the bush, if you're a home care worker and aged care, joining together, the government has made bargaining difficult, and the consequences are that wages are in decline in real terms, and New Zealand workers feel that. So we're interested in rights for workers.
You do accept that some people do want to negotiate independently with their employers, though?
I accept that most workers don't negotiate independently with their employers. It's a unilateral bargain, and the figures released last week showed that 46% of Kiwis didn't get a pay increase last year. And if you go out on the streets of Invercargill, you'll meet worker after worker after worker who hasn't had a pay increase year on year on year. That's what individual bargaining looks like in most workplaces.
Now, currently legislation finding its way through Parliament, you have expressed publicly concerns.
That's what I'm down in Southland for, and next week there'll be a rally here opposing these changes. The Cabinet papers say these law changes will allow employers to drive wages down. And you've got to ask, in an economy that's falling further and further behind, 50% of Kiwis say they struggle to pay their bills each week. The government's putting through legislation to drive wages down. It even removes the tea break and the lunch break. That's how good it is. And we're totally opposed to it, and we intend to organise against it.
Realistically, though, what percentage of employers do you think would strip employees of those rights, if you like?
The ones that will take advantage of this law. I mean, if it's not a problem, don't change the law, leave it there. To run an argument, as the government's trying to do, is that most workers will still give most employers will still give a tea break and a lunch break, is to say that those bad employers won't have to. And we know before this law was introduced in 2008 that there were whole groups of workers that were not getting breaks and were suffering for it. It's a basic human right to be able to stop, have something to eat, have something to drink, talk to your workmates and have a rest.
School volunteers who managed the safe crossing of thousands of school-aged pedestrians were given a special treat on behalf of the city today. Around 250 Year 6, 7 and 8 children from 10 schools were rewarded for their road safety efforts and community service this morning by police and City Council. In a blaze of orange, the 10 to 13-year-olds were officially thanked for their duties before marching down East Street with road crossing signs to the Civic Chambers before heading to Splash Palace for a free swim on the city. Police trained the volunteers who work year-round, ensuring the safe passage across pedestrian crossings outside the city's schools. And stay with us after the break. Coming to the end of this year's White Ribbon campaign, we tackle the issue of domestic violence. Welcome back. Yesterday was White Ribbon Day, or the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women. The first White Ribbon campaign was held in 1991 and is now one of the largest anti-violence programs in the world, with 57 countries taking part. New Zealand Counsellors Association Southland Branch Chair Darren Jack says part of the problem is pressure placed on men and boys to not express and talk about their emotions.
You try to avoid having sort of broad brush strokes, but and you know, I catch myself doing this with my own son. I do the, you'll be right, you're a big brave boy, and that'll be fine. But I think actually it does the young men in our world a huge disservice to not allow them to express sad or hurt or scared. So I think if boys felt easier about doing that, and if society accepted them doing that, then potentially they wouldn't need to kind of bottle those emotions up that then come out later as angry and violent.
How often do men come forward to accept counselling or help through counselling versus those that are, I guess, sentenced by the court judicial process? Right.
Well, my experience working privately would be that men who aren't mandated to come to counselling are very rare. And so obviously the ones who are instructed to come by the court are forced to come. Men outside of the court process normally have an outside motivating factor, and that might be their partner, or it might be their fear for their children. There would need to be some construct outside of themselves for them to enable themselves to kind of put their hand up and go, I need some help with this.
We're not only talking about physical abuse, though, are we? Also that psychological abuse that does take place within relationships or families.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, abuse fits many facets, but I think any time where one person uses power and control to get what they want in a relationship, and that force is used, then that falls into the abuse category. So that's going to be words, to be threats, emotional harm. So not just physical hitting and assault.
To most, the most abhorrent thing you can do really is lift a fist or a hand to someone you love, let alone anyone really, not within the family, anyone in society. How do these men or perpetrators of this sort of family violence justify it to themselves?
I think most people know that harming another individual is wrong, and so that's why often these forms of abuse happen behind closed doors. Because that is the case, the perpetrators need to be able to make that okay in their head and be able to get past that part of them that knows it's wrong. And so they get really good at telling themselves that it's okay, or justifying that sort of behaviour. And they have common ways of doing that, like telling themselves, it's no big deal, I was angry, she deserved it, no one was hurt really, I won't do that again. And those are things that they get so good at telling themselves, they start believing those things. So that's how, in my opinion, they're able to engage in that sort of behaviour that ultimately they know is wrong.
How much of it's learned behaviour, intergenerational learned behaviour from fathers passing on to sons?
Look, I think that's something you can't deny. I mean, we learn how to be parents from our own parents. And so if we've been brought up in an environment where that's been okay, for that to happen, then we will probably, in all likelihood, even though we may not have enjoyed it ourselves, it will still be our fallback position, that will be ultimately okay if I'm angry enough. And so, to say that it's that is not generational, isn't probably very accurate. But alongside that, I think as men and as as adults, we get to choose, and so there comes a point where it's no longer responsible to say, this is how Dad did it, so I'm allowed to as well. Once we know something is wrong, we then get to choose about whether we want to continue that behaviour.
How much does socio-economic background factor into it? Is there a difference, on a lower income, is there a lot more to be angry about, or are we just seeing the same thing across the board?
Look, I think people are people, and while there might be certain socio-economic groups that are overrepresented sort of statistically, I think it has more to do with the stresses that are involved, and I think where the stresses are high and where appropriate mechanisms for communicating are low, then the potential chances for domestic violence and physical and other sorts of abuse increase, irrespective of socio-economic or cultural group.
So what options are there if people are sitting at home going, well, look, I'm on the receiving end of family violence, or I'm a perpetrator, or I'm thinking that I may go to that length with my family to actually get violence. What help is there out there?
I think if it's a safety issue, Hunter, then clearly the police need to be involved. If you have fears for yourself or fears for your children, then I would have no hesitation in calling the police and talking to them about what the options are. Outside of that, therapeutically, I think Don Wiseman at Stopping Violence Southland has a number of programs, both individual and group, which are tailored to meet the needs of both the victims but also the perpetrators. Refuge, Southland, Rape Crisis, there's just a number of agencies out there that are in a position to offer support.
Let's just briefly talk about the White Ribbon Appeal. This is a great step forward, isn't it? And we're seeing more each year. We're seeing more and more awareness of the situation.
Yeah, look, I think anything that brings this sort of problem to the attention of the public is really important. And I think, as a member of the public, our responsibility is actually to make our world, a better place. And so one of the ways that we can do that is that if we see violence or domestic abuse, or we fear that happening, then in a safe way, we bring that to someone's attention. And so I think, White Ribbon Day is just another reminder of our responsibilities as part of the community.
And that's it from us. Coming up on Sport, the post-match reaction to the All Blacks' thrilling last-minute victory in Dublin. From the news team, good night.